There's a pattern in history that has destroyed 3 global superpowers in the last 500 years. And right now, in 2025, the United States is following that exact same pattern, stage by stage, decision by decision, almost like we're reading from the same script that led to catastrophe every single time before. In 1590, Spain was the richest empire on earth. They controlled half the world's gold and silver. Their military dominated Europe. Their currency was accepted everywhere. Within 80 years, they were bankrupt, a second-rate power that never recovered. In 1914, Britain ruled the largest empire in human history. The sun never set on British territory. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Within 40 years, the empire was gone. The currency collapsed. They became America's junior partner. In 1991, the Soviet Union was the other superpower. Nuclear weapons, global influence, satellites spanning the globe. It ceased to exist in 900 days. Not from war, but from economic implosion. 3 times. 3 superpowers. 3 complete collapses, all following the exact same sequence. And here's what should terrify you. The United States has already completed 5 of the 7 stages. We're not approaching the pattern. We're deep inside it. This is the story of how empires die, why they always think they're different, and why the math says we're next. And it's happening faster than anyone wants to admit. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what imperial collapse actually looks like, not in textbooks, but in practice, what it means when a superpower dies. Imperial collapse doesn't start with invasion or military defeat. It starts with economic exhaustion. The empire extends beyond its ability to maintain itself. Military bases in 150 countries, wars on multiple fronts, promises it cannot keep, debts it cannot repay. At first, the decline is invisible. The currency still works, the military still wins battles, the government still makes promises. But beneath the surface, the foundation is cracking. Resources are misallocated. Productive capacity shrinks. The best and brightest leave. Then comes the acceleration. Allies start hedging. Enemies test boundaries. Trade partners seek alternatives. The reserve currency status erodes. And suddenly, the advantages that made you powerful become vulnerabilities. Your currency, once demanded by everyone, comes flooding back home. Your military, spread across the world, becomes unsustainable. Your promises, once guaranteed by strength, become empty words. That's not theoretical. That's what happened to Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. And it happened because they made exactly the same decisions we're making now. They believed their power was permanent. They overextended militarily. They debased their currency. And they refused to accept reality until collapse was already underway. Let's look at how it actually happened 3 times the exact same way. Let's start with the first global empire, Spain. The 1500s to the 1600s. This is the original blueprint. After Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492, Spain became the first true world power. They conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, seized control of the richest gold and silver mines ever discovered. By 1550, Spanish galleons were bringing home 200 tons of silver per year. By 1600, over 400 tons annually. Spain controlled the money supply of Europe. The Spanish real was the global reserve currency. Everyone wanted Spanish silver. And this is where the pattern begins, with a country that controls the money of the world and believes that makes them invincible. King Philip II, ruling from 1556 to 1598, had more money than any monarch in history, and he spent it on empire. Stage 1. Military overextension. Spain fought wars everywhere simultaneously. Against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, against France and Italy, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England's navy, wars in the Philippines, wars in the Americas. By 1580, Spain had military commitments on 4 continents. The cost was staggering. Half of Spain's revenue went to the military, and still, it wasn't enough. Stage 2. Currency debasement. The Spanish crown couldn't pay its bills with taxes alone, so they did what every failing empire does. They debased the currency. They started mixing copper into silver coins. A coin that was supposed to be pure silver became 50% copper, then 75% copper. The face value stayed the same, but the real value plummeted. By 1600, Spanish silver coins contained barely any silver. Merchants stopped accepting them at face value. Inflation exploded. Stage 3. Debt spiral. Spain borrowed constantly from Italian bankers, from German bankers, from anyone who would lend. By 1557, less than 20 years into Philip's reign, Spain declared bankruptcy. They defaulted on their debts, restructured, and kept borrowing. They declared bankruptcy again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596, 4 bankruptcies in 40 years. Each time they promised reforms. Each time they went right back to borrowing and spending. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. Here's what people don't understand about Spain's collapse. They had all the gold and silver in the world, and it destroyed them. Because when you have unlimited money, you stop producing. Why grow food when you can import it? Why build ships when you can buy them? Why innovate when you can just spend? Spanish nobility considered work beneath them. Manufacturing declined. Agriculture stagnated. All the wealth flowed to importing goods from other countries. The gold and silver that came from the Americas went straight back out to pay for French wine, Italian silk, Dutch goods. Spain became a conduit. Wealth flowed through them, but none of it stayed. By 1600, Spain was producing almost nothing. They were entirely dependent on imports, entirely dependent on silver to pay for everything. And when the silver mines began to deplete, when production dropped, the entire system collapsed. Stage 5, social decay. With the economy failing, crime exploded, beggars filled the streets of Madrid, productive citizens immigrated. The best minds left for France, England, the Netherlands, countries that were building, creating, growing. Spain was left with bureaucrats, soldiers, and priests. No one creating wealth, everyone consuming it. By 1640, Spain lost Portugal. By 1650, they lost the Netherlands, their richest territory. By 1700, the Spanish Empire was a shell, still large on paper, but economically dead. They went from the world's superpower to a secondary power in less than a century, and they never recovered. Spain today is a regional European country, pleasant, cultured, but irrelevant on the world stage. The descendants of the conquistadors are a tourist destination. That's what imperial collapse looks like. Let's jump forward 300 years and look at Britain, the empire where the sun never set. At its peak, Britain controlled 25% of the world's land surface and had 400 million subjects. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Every major trade contract was denominated in pounds. Every central bank held British bonds. London was the financial center of the world. But just like Spain, they believed their power was permanent. And they were wrong. They were already following the pattern that had doomed previous empires. Stage 1. Military overextension. By 1900, Britain had military commitments everywhere. They had to defend territories on 6 continents: India, Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. The cost was enormous. And when World War I started in 1914, Britain faced a choice: stay neutral and let Europe destroy itself, or jump in and bankrupt the empire to win. They chose to fight. World War I cost Britain over $40 billion, $1 trillion in today's money. They borrowed from everyone, mostly from the United States. By 1918, Britain owed America billions. The creditor had become the debtor, but they'd won the war. They kept the empire. They thought they could rebuild. They were wrong. Stage 2, currency debasement. The pound sterling was supposed to be backed by gold, but the war had drained Britain's gold reserves. They shipped gold to America to pay for weapons, food, and supplies. By 1920, Britain's gold reserves were half of what they had been in 1914, but they tried to maintain the pound's value anyway. In 1925, Britain returned to the gold standard at the pre-war rate. The problem? The pound was overvalued. British exports became too expensive. Manufacturing declined, unemployment rose, and the government had to keep interest rates high to defend the currency. This destroyed the domestic economy. By 1931, they couldn't hold it anymore. Britain abandoned the gold standard, and the pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The global reserve currency had just admitted it couldn't keep its promises. Stage 3, debt spiral. Britain never recovered from World War I debt. Then World War II started. Another $120 billion in costs. More borrowing from America. By 1945, Britain owed the United States and Canada over $30 billion more than Britain's entire GDP. The war was won, but the empire was finished. They couldn't defend it anymore. They couldn't afford it. They couldn't maintain it. Stage 4, loss of empire. In 1947, Britain gave up India, the crown jewel of the empire. Over the next 20 years, they lost everything: Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. By 1970, the British Empire was just a memory. The sun set on the empire that once controlled a quarter of the world. And just like Spain, Britain lost its empire, its influence, and its wealth. Stage 5, currency collapse. The pound continued to fall. In 1940, 1 pound equaled $4.03. By 1950, it was $2.80. By 1970, it was $2.40. By 1980, it was $2.30. The pound, once the global reserve currency, became just a regional currency. Britain had tried to maintain the pretense of power, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, nuclear weapons, a special relationship with America, but everyone knew the truth. They were a former power, a museum of what used to be great. The empire was gone, and it never came back. But Britain's story isn't unique. Let's look at the most recent example, the Soviet Union. After World War II, the USSR emerged as a superpower, armed with nuclear weapons, global influence, and satellites in space. But beneath the surface, the Soviet economy was dying. Stage 1. Military overextension. The Soviet Union spent 15–20% of its GDP on the military, 3 times what America spent. They had to match American technology, American reach, American alliances, but their economy was a fraction of the size of America's. They were spread thin, propping up Cuba, supporting Syria, Vietnam, North Korea, Angola, and Ethiopia. Everywhere America had influence, they had to counter. The cost was unsustainable. Stage 2. Economic stagnation. The Soviet economy stopped growing in the 1970 seconds. Oil revenue kept them afloat, but nothing else worked. Factories produced junk. Farms failed. Technology fell decades behind. By the 1980 seconds, the Soviet Union was importing grain. A country with some of the best farmland on earth couldn't feed itself. Why? Because central planning doesn't work. Because innovation dies under control. Because no one produces when there's no incentive. The Soviet Union's central economic model was failing, and no one could fix it. Stage 3. Currency collapse. The ruble was never a real currency. It couldn't be exchanged internationally. Even Soviet citizens didn't trust it. They used dollars when they could get them. The government had to buy foreign goods with gold and oil because nobody wanted rubles. By 1985, oil prices dropped. Soviet gold reserves were depleting. They were running out of real money. Stage 4. Loss of empire. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Eastern Europe left. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany gone in a year. The satellites that gave the Soviet Union strategic depth vanished. The Soviet government couldn't stop it. They were broke. The empire was crumbling from within. Stage 5. Complete collapse. On the 26th of December 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. In just 900 days, the superpower collapsed from internal economic failure. The military couldn't be paid. The government couldn't function. The ruble became worthless. A superpower with 30,000 nuclear weapons collapsed from economic implosion. The pattern played out again: overextension, currency failure, debt, loss of empire, collapse. And here's the scary part. The United States is following the exact same pattern. We've already completed 5 of the 7 stages, and we're moving fast toward the final collapse. Stage 1. Military overextension. The United States has over 750 military bases in 80 countries. We have troops in 150 countries. We're committed to defending Europe through NATO, defending Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, fighting in the Middle East, countering China, countering Russia. Our military budget is $850 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined, and it's still not enough. We're stretched thin. Equipment is aging. Recruitment is down. We have commitments we can't fulfill. If China invades Taiwan, if Russia pushes into NATO territory, if Iran closes the Persian Gulf, we can't respond to all of it simultaneously. We're overextended, just like Spain, just like Britain, just like the USSR. Now let's look at the second stage. Currency debasement. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window, taking the dollar off the gold standard. The dollar became pure fiat currency. Since 2000, the money supply has increased by 400%. Since 2020, we've printed over $6 trillion. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. We're not mixing copper into silver coins. We're just printing unlimited paper. The mechanism is different, but the result is the same. Debasement is happening. The U.S. dollar, once the strongest currency in the world, is eroding. It's losing its value at an unprecedented rate, and with that, the trust that other nations had in the U.S. economy. The world is beginning to diversify away from the dollar, and that's a major warning sign. We can already see the early cracks. Countries like China and Russia are increasingly trading in their own currencies, and even oil-producing nations are accepting yuan instead of dollars. The dollar's status as the global reserve currency is fading, and once that happens, we'll enter the final stages of collapse. Stage 3, debt spiral. The United States owes $36 trillion, 120% of GDP. Interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year. We're spending more on interest than on defense. We run deficits every year. In 2024, we'll have a deficit of $1.8 trillion in a growing economy. During peacetime, we borrow just to pay the interest on previous borrowing. That's the definition of a debt spiral. It's unsustainable. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain borrowed until it collapsed. The USSR ran out of money. And we're on the same path. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. America doesn't make things anymore. We design, we finance, we consume, but we don't produce. Our manufacturing base has been gutted. We import $800 billion more than we export annually. We're dependent on foreign supply chains for everything from medicine to military components. Just like Spain became dependent on imports while the silver flowed out, we're dependent on imports while dollars flow out. And just like Spain, when the money stops flowing, we're in trouble. Stage 5, social decay. Trust in institutions is at an all-time low. Crime is rising, homelessness is exploding. Drug overdoses kill 100,000 Americans annually. The best and brightest are leaving or checking out. Fertility rates are collapsing. Political dysfunction is total. We can't agree on anything. We can't fix anything. We can't build anything. The signs of decay are everywhere, but everyone pretends it's fine. It's not fine. The decay is real, and it's accelerating. We're not at the end yet, but we're deep into the sequence. The final stages of collapse are always the most dramatic and the most painful. Once an empire reaches stage 6 loss of reserve currency status, it is virtually impossible to turn things around. We've already seen early signs that the US is entering this stage. The cracks are forming, and they're impossible to ignore. Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This is where the real unraveling begins. For decades, the US dollar has been the global reserve currency. It's been the currency that oil has been priced in, that international trade has been conducted with, and that central banks have held as a store of value. But we're starting to see a shift. Countries like China and Russia are increasingly trading in their own currencies. The BRICS nations are developing alternatives to the dollar, and central banks around the world are buying gold in increasing quantities. When the dollar is no longer the world's preferred currency, it will flood back into the United States. This will cause inflation to skyrocket, as the U.S. will have to absorb all the excess currency that used to be in global circulation. The value of the dollar will plummet, and everything that depends on it, from imports to government debt, will become unsustainable. The country will face a currency crisis. This is exactly what happened to Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Their currencies lost their value, and with it, their global influence. And once the dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency, it will mark the beginning of the end. The United States will no longer be able to sustain its military or its global influence. Countries that have relied on the U.S. dollar will start diversifying their holdings and looking for safer options. This shift away from the dollar will cause the U.S. to lose its position at the top of the financial system. The impact will be devastating, and it's already starting to happen. We're in the early stages of this process now. It's not an accident. The global financial system is moving away from the dollar, and the U.S. is losing its grip on the global economy. The same pattern that led to the collapse of Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union is repeating itself, and the U.S. is already in the final stages. Stage 7, collapse. This is when everything finally falls apart. It's sudden, brutal, and irreversible. When an empire reaches this stage, it can't recover. The reserve currency fails. The debt becomes impossible to manage. The military can't be funded. The government can't function. Everything that was once a symbol of power and strength becomes a shadow of what it once was. The empire collapses from within. This collapse doesn't happen gradually. It happens quickly and violently. The Soviet Union went from being a superpower to non-existent in just 900 days. Britain lost its empire in 20 years. Spain took longer, but the result was the same. The collapse is always sudden and brutal. There's no graceful decline. There's no slow transition. When an empire's final days arrive, everything changes overnight. The U.S. is already deep into the stages of collapse. The military is overstretched, the the currency is losing its value, and the debt is spiraling out of control. Our productive capacity has been hollowed out, and our society is in a state of decay. We're already in stage 5, and the signs are clear that we're heading towards stage 6 and stage 7. The collapse is coming, and it won't be slow. It will be sudden, and it will be brutal. Now, let's take a step back and look at what we can do about this. Is there any way out of this pattern? Can the United States avoid the same fate that befell Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union? The truth is, there's still time to change course, but the window is closing rapidly. If we don't act soon, we will follow the same trajectory. The good news is, we can still make changes to reverse the course. But those changes require a massive shift in how we think about our economy, our military, and our global influence. We need to face the reality that we cannot continue living beyond our means. We can't keep borrowing, printing money, and fighting wars on multiple fronts. If we don't make these changes now, we will reach stage 6 and stage 7, and there will be no turning back. So, what would it take for the United States to avoid the same fate as these past empires? First, we need to address the military overextension. The U.S. military is spread thin across the globe, with commitments in over 150 countries. We have over 750 military bases in 80 countries, and we're involved in conflicts on multiple fronts. This kind of global presence is unsustainable. We need to scale back our military commitments and focus on defending our interests at home. We can't afford to be the world's policeman anymore. We need to shift our priorities and stop fighting wars that don't serve our long-term interests. Second, we need to tackle our debt problem. The United States owes $36 trillion, and the interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year. We're spending more on interest than on defense. This debt is a ticking time bomb, and if we don't address it soon, it will implode. We need to stop borrowing to pay the interest on previous borrowing. We need to cut spending, reduce our debt, and rebuild our economy from the ground up. Third, we need to restore our productive capacity. The United States used to be the world's manufacturing powerhouse, but we've outsourced most of our production to other countries. We need to bring jobs back home and focus on creating wealth through innovation and manufacturing. If we don't start producing again, we will continue to depend on imports, and our economy will continue to deteriorate. Finally, we need to restore faith in our institutions. Trust in government, institutions, and leaders is at an all-time low. This erodes the foundation of our society and leads to social decay. We need leaders who are willing to make the tough decisions, who will prioritize the needs of the country over political gamesmanship. We need a government that is accountable to the people, not to special interests. The truth is, we're already on the verge of a critical decision. The warning signs are everywhere. The question we need to ask ourselves is, do we continue down this path of military overextension, economic mismanagement, and currency debasement, or do we change direction before it's too late? It's easy to ignore these signs when things seem to be functioning as usual, but just because things are stable on the surface doesn't mean they are secure. Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union all thought they were invincible at their peaks. Each empire, at some point, believed their power would last forever. And in each case, when the empire began to collapse, the cracks were already there, hidden beneath the surface, unseen by the masses. The collapse of an empire doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow burn, a gradual erosion of power, until suddenly, everything that once seemed strong falls apart. When an empire becomes too big, too powerful, too arrogant, it begins to overextend itself. It fights wars it can't afford, borrows money it can't repay, and inflates its currency to meet the demands of a system that is beyond its control. For the United States, this has already started. We're fighting wars on multiple fronts, from the Middle East to Asia. We're spreading ourselves thin, committing resources to military operations that drain our treasury and create endless debts. We've got military bases in over 150 countries, fighting in regions that don't directly benefit us. And these military operations are funded by borrowing money, printing more currency, and hoping that somehow it all works out. But it won't. History has shown us time and time again that when an empire loses control of its spending, its military, and its currency, collapse is inevitable. The United States is heading down the same path that led to the downfall of past empires. And unless we take action now, the cost of inaction will be catastrophic. We are already witnessing signs of decline. Our military is overstretched, unable to meet the demands of every conflict in which we are involved. Our economy is weakened by unsustainable debt levels and the loss of manufacturing capacity. Our social fabric is fraying as inequality grows. trust in government collapses, and people turn against each other. The cracks are beginning to show, and soon they will become chasms. If we don't change direction now, we'll be facing the same fate as Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. There's still hope, but only if we act now. The truth is, we don't have to follow the same trajectory. We don't have to allow history to repeat itself. We have the power to change course before the final collapse happens. But to do so, we must be willing to confront the hard truths and make difficult decisions. The first step is acknowledging that the current system is broken. We can no longer afford to continue our military overreach. We can no longer afford to pile on more debt, borrowing from future generations to pay for our present-day wars and failures. We must rebuild our economy from the ground up, focusing on self-sufficiency and innovation. It's time to bring manufacturing back home, to invest in technology, infrastructure, and education. Only by doing this can we secure a future that is independent of foreign influences and external debt. But this requires a complete shift in our mindset. We must stop seeing military dominance as a sign of strength. We need to redefine what it means to be a powerful nation. True strength lies not in having the largest military or the most weapons, but in having a strong economy, a healthy society, and a government that works for the people. The U.S. has always been a beacon of hope for the world, a place where people could build a future through hard work, innovation, and creativity. But over the last few decades, we've lost sight of those values. Instead, we've become obsessed with maintaining global dominance, even when it comes at the expense of our own prosperity. Now is the time to reclaim those values and rebuild the country from the inside out. So, how do we rebuild? How do we return to the path of prosperity, freedom, and independence that once defined the United States? It starts with economic reform, military restraint, and social restoration. Economic reform. First and foremost, we must address the debt crisis. The United States is $36 trillion in debt, and we're spending more on interest than we are on defense. The system is unsustainable, and the longer we wait, the harder it will be to fix. We need to reduce government spending, eliminate waste, and prioritize investments that will grow the economy. We must encourage innovation, support small businesses, and rebuild our manufacturing base. The U.S. once had the most powerful economy in the world, and we can do it again, but we need to start making smarter choices and investing in our future. Military restraint. Second, we need to bring our military commitments back within reason. We cannot continue to be the world's policemen, fighting wars that do not serve our long-term interests. We need to focus on defending our borders, maintaining a strong defense, and supporting our allies in a way that does not involve endless wars. It's time to pull back from unnecessary military interventions and concentrate on building a defense that reflects the needs of the modern world. We have to stop spreading ourselves too thin, or we risk the same fate as every empire that overextended itself. Social restoration. Finally, we must restore social trust and cohesion. Our society is fractured. Political polarization is at an all-time high, and people no longer believe in the institutions that once held us together. It's time to rebuild those institutions. We need leaders who will prioritize unity, who will work together to solve the issues that matter most, and who will make decisions based on the long-term good of the country, not short-term political gain. To restore trust in government, we need transparency, accountability, and integrity. We need to stop the constant partisan bickering and focus on the issues that matter most to the American people. We need to come together as a nation, just as we have in the past, and work towards a brighter future for ourselves and future generations. Imagine a future where the United States is not just surviving, but thriving. A country that leads the world in innovation, technology, and economic growth. A country that doesn't rely on military force to maintain influence, but instead builds partnerships based on mutual respect and shared interests. A nation that invests in its people, its communities, and its future. This future is possible, but it requires a complete shift in how we think about our role in the world. We need to stop being the world's policeman and start being a leader in education, technology, and sustainable growth. We need to invest in clean energy, modern infrastructure, and the workforce of the future. We need to rebuild our manufacturing base, create good-paying jobs, and reduce our dependence on foreign supply chains. The road to this future will not be easy. It will require sacrifice, hard work, and a willingness to confront difficult truths. But if we take the necessary steps now, we can avoid the same fate that befell Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. We can rebuild our nation and secure a future that is prosperous, strong, and independent. In the end, the choice is ours. We can choose to continue down the path of decline, ignoring the warning signs and hoping for a different outcome. Or we can face reality, take action, and rebuild our country before it's too late. The patterns are clear. The stages of collapse are well documented. Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union all followed the same path, and now the United States is doing the same. But we don't have to repeat their mistakes. We can choose a different future, a future where the United States stands strong, united, and prosperous. Do you believe the United States is heading toward collapse, or is there still time to turn things around? What steps do you think we can take to avoid the same fate as past empires? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, make sure to subscribe for more content on how we can build a better future for our country.